Gator fans. So in this video, it's not going to be like a piggyback of what I said in the Kentucky game, but what I'm going to do is I'm talking about specifically the rivalry between Florida and Kentucky in men's basketball. Not football, but in men's basketball, because it has become a lot more competitive over the last 20 years. Well, actually over the last, practically almost 35 years, because Florida was basically college basketball, afterthought in the SEC. Kentucky obviously has great history. They say on their apparel this year, Kentucky basketball, an unparalleled tradition, and rightfully so when you talk about the history of SEC men hoops, SEC hoops in general, because you got to include the ladies in it too. But it's Kentucky is obviously, when you think of college basketball, you think of Kentucky, you think of Duke and North Carolina and UCLA and Kansas and Indiana and Michigan State. You go through quite a bit of teams, and then that's when you get to Florida. I think you could maybe argue that Florida is now one of the top 15 brands in college men's basketball. Well, maybe even top 10 with the modern success that they've had. Obviously, their success doesn't go all the way back as those other teams I just mentioned, but in terms of modern era, in the 2000s and beyond, Florida has now obviously leveled up in that regard. So this is just talking about how Florida and Kentucky have now become the heavyweights of SEC basketball now. You got Kentucky. They had obviously Adolph Rupp during the from the 30s through the 40s through the 50s through the 60s, and even into a little bit into the 70s before he gave the reins to Joe B. Hall, who went on to win a championship in his own right. But Adolph Rupp coached from the 30s all the way to the 70s. So you're talking probably two, maybe even three generations of Kentucky fans that got to see Adolph Rupp coach Kentucky basketball and have them at the level that they were at during his time there. And that obviously, like you said, tradition, because college sports is a lot about, still about tradition to this day, that got passed down to their children, who passed it down to the grandchildren, to the great grandchildren, to the great grandchildren, and great great grandchildren, and so on and so forth. Adolph Rupp won four national championships four national championships from the late 40s to the late 50s. Won three in a 4-year span from 48 to 51, and obviously lost in a few other Final Four appearances and a few other national title games. Otherwise, he would have been in it. Like right here in 1965, they lost in the national title game. In 1966, excuse me. And then he eventually would pass the reins to Joe B. Hall, who would win the national championship in 1977 through 78. And then after Joe B. Hall came Eddie Sutton. Kentucky didn't really get the same level of success with Eddie Sutton. And then eventually Rick Pitino, who would then go coach at Louisville and have great success there. And now he's coaching at, I believe it's St. John's now. Yes, St. John's. He's coaching at St. John's now. I'll look that up to make sure I'm correct. He won a national championship with Kentucky in 1996, and then went back to the national title game in his final year there in 1997. And then following year, after Rick Pitino left, Tubby Smith won the national title in his very first season at Kentucky in 1998. So, then obviously you go to Billy Gilsby, who was only there for 2 years, and then you got the great John Calipari, who went to 4 Final Fours and won a national title in 2012 with Kentucky before leaving to go at Arkansas, and here they are now with Mark Pope. And it's just, that's the era. I'm just explaining to you the eras of dominance that Kentucky had during their time there. And now we're going to talk about Florida. Florida for a long time was, like I said, an afterthought in basketball. John Maher, Norm Sloan, Tommy Barlett, John Lotz. The NCAA tournament for basketball has been around since 1939, and Florida did not make their first appearance until 1987. Trying to pulling something up here. I'm on sportsreference.com. in 1939, that's when it got started, and then 1987. Okay, so and in those first two appearances from 87 to 88, Florida had their seasons punished by the NCAA due to NCAA penalties and restrictions. And Norm Sloan would eventually got removed from the position, went to Don Devo, who then got the position, who went 7-21, which safe to say he was probably one of the worst basketball coaches of all time at UF. And then he gave the position to Lon Kruger, who got Florida to their first Final Four appearance in 1994. And then eventually here came Billy Donovan, and obviously we know what was done there. Billy Donovan in year 4 would get Florida to a national title game in 2000. Eventually would win the national championship in 06, and then repeated in 07. Got Florida back to the Final Four in 2014, and that would be his last Final Four appearance before the incomparable Michael White would eventually take the reins at Florida, only getting Florida to an Elite 8 appearance in 2017, losing to South Carolina, which, I mean, granted, is not bad for a year 2 coach, but sadly, he would never make it to another Sweet 16 again, because for 3 of the next 4 years, they would lose in the second round to teams that probably had no business losing to. Oral Roberts being the main one, and then we obviously are now here with the Todd Golden era. 16 and 17, his first year, I was already almost on the verge of quitting on him, because I'm like, how in the world do you go 16 and 17? And then he gets a little bit better, losing the first round, but goes to the SEC tournament finals and gets a 24-12 record, and then obviously won the national title last year. And currently, right now, Florida is 19 and 6. So this is obviously the two most successful programs in SEC basketball. Florida more modern. Kentucky only has 1 title this century. That was the 2012 one I talked about. But Florida has 3 this century and could have won 4 in this century. So obviously they're more modern in terms of SEC royalty, while Kentucky is the traditional, historical landmark in the conference. And that's what made that Saturday game so special. When you have 2 of the elite brands in a particular sport of that conference battling it out for supremacy of the conference, it's what adds the fuel to that fire, and it's what makes that rivalry so special. What made what part of what made Ohio State and Michigan in college makes Ohio State and Michigan in college football so special is not just the hatred each fan base has for the opponent, but the fact that at one point these teams were in the Big Ten East, when the Big Ten was split into 2 divisions, and the winner of that game would go to the Big Ten championship game, like Florida and Georgia in the SEC for football. Excuse me. How eventually the playoff did come around, and national title aspirations for Ohio State and Michigan would be put on the line when they were against each other. Heisman Trophy implications, Charles Woodson having to play the game of his life against Ohio State to embark on being, I think, the first defensive player to win Heisman Trophy in college football. So, not trying to get off topic here. That's what isn't. I'm just giving that as like an example of what makes Florida and Kentucky so big for both programs and for both fan bases. And Kentucky, because Kentucky fans, because it's been a while since they've seen their team be a consistent, player in the Final Four, because they haven't made it back to the Final Four since 2013. They kind of like hate seeing another team from the SEC, be in it. It's like, no, that should be us. Like we are the main, gold standard in basketball in the SEC, and to see other teams in it, Alabama go there, Auburn go there, Florida's been there, make it a few times before we get back. They're taking the loss pretty badly on Twitter. They can't really they keep thinking about the bad officiating and Florida flopping and this, that, and the third, and they can't just say, you know what, Florida won the game fair and square. And they just don't like the idea that Florida right now is the best program in SEC basketball with the way that they've played throughout their competition this year and last year as well. And that with Todd Golden, because Todd Golden is only, I think he'll be 41 this year. He likely could be at Florida for a long time, like Billy Donovan was at Florida for a long time, because Billy Donovan was really young when he stepped into Gainesville, and he became the coach that he would be recognized being in Gator history. So for Kentucky, it's not a good look for Mark Pope because of the standards that come in Lexington, that are there in Lexington, and so far he has not been able to match it. While Todd Golden has really exceeded expectations in Gainesville, because he was practically not a well-known commodity coming out of San Francisco to take the Florida job. There wasn't really high expectations for him at first, or there wasn't high optimism, and now he is right now. He right now is the top coach in the Florida athletic programs until they can get their football team back in order. And right now, Florida basketball is the biggest attraction sports-wise for that university. You still have Kevin Sullivan in the baseball department, but Kevin Sullivan's been there for a long time, and Florida has not won the College World Series since 2017. So right now, Florida fans are going with what's hot, and what's hot is Todd Golden in this basketball unit. And Florida and Kentucky will see each other again on March 7th in the Rupp Arena. Kentucky fans already have that date circled in blue, I guess. But if that SEC regular season title is already locked up, they can go ahead and beat Florida by 100. It's not going to give them the championship, so they can circle that date all they want. Until then, they're just going to have to accept the fact that right now Florida is the top program in the conference. So, yeah, we'll see you again, Kentucky. But go Gators.